Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's session on managing slips, trips, and falls in the workplace. We hope that you find this webinar informative and take something away from the session. As we do with all our presentations, both internally and externally, we always start off by displaying our DNA and explaining what it means to us as employees or Protector. Our DNA allows us to operate consistently as one team across the different countries that we operate in, and we are encouraged to live and breathe this every day while representing the company. Today, you can see that we've highlighted committed, and this is just because we are committed to our clients and committed to providing them with information and training on the relevant topics, such as the one we're going to cover today. Before we start then, just a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this module today, and it will be made available on our website in the very near future. So if you want to access this or share it with your colleagues, you can feel free to do so. We want and encourage your participation via Slido, and time permitting, a bit of Q&A at the end. As you can see on the screen now on the right hand side, there's a QR code and a code to join Slido. So if you already have the Slido app, then feel free to join using this code. If you don't have the app, then by all means feel free to download it using the App Store on your mobile device and use the code provided. I will put the code in the top of each slide to allow you time to download and enter that code. Microphones will be muted until the Q&A at the end, and if possible, please enjoy the presentation.
So firstly, the objectives for this morning's webinar. Firstly, for you to understand the common causes and consequences of slips, trips and falls in the workplace, to be confident identifying potential hazards and the risk factors associated with slips, trips and falls across various work settings, to be able to implement proactive measures and control strategies to prevent them in the workplace, to help you develop effective communication and training protocols to promote safety awareness amongst your employees, and give you enough information to allow you to evaluate the effectiveness of safety interventions and continuously improve. Try and understand the common causes, identify hazards and conduct risk assessments, then on to prevention strategies and control measures. We're then going to look at two actual real-life case studies and their legal implications. Moving on to claims documentation and defensibility, and then effective communication and employee training, monitoring and evaluating the slips, trips and falls prevention measures employed, how we can leverage new technologies for enhanced safety, and then finally some practical steps for reducing slips, trips and fall risks.
So who are we then? Well, my name is David Searle. I'm one of the risk engineers here at Protector, and I've worked with Protector for just over 1 year now, mainly in the commercial property and casualty sector. Previous to this, I was a regional health and safety and fire safety manager, so I do have experience dealing with preventable injuries resulting from slips, trips or falls.
And I'm Matt Coombs, another risk engineer at Protector. I joined around 4.5 years ago, having previously worked at RSA. I have a risk management background across both property and casualty, with my primary focus now on the commercial sector, looking after a number of our larger clients.
So why are we focusing on this topic today then? Slips, trips and falls are not just minor mishaps. They've been around for as long as humans have been on this earth, and although significant resources have been directed to reducing them, they are still very common and account for a large percentage of accidents. The consequences can be far-reaching for organizations such as lost productivity, even legal proceedings, and then people who are victims of slips, trips and falls can be left with permanent disabilities.
Okay, so before we dive in, we're going to start with a quick poll using Slido to roughly gauge the audience in attendance today. So if you haven't already, please join at slido.com or using the app with the code shown on screen, which is 5953309. We'll give you a minute or so to see how many responses come in. And we're expecting some of our Nordic colleagues, a number of broker partners, and hopefully a pretty wide range of clients from our commercial and public sector. Looks like a lot of employees at the moment, David.
Yeah, Protect Our Employees are leading the way so far. There seems to be a good balance, a good balance of different industries on at the minute.
So we've had about 33 responses. Looks like there's about 90 on the call. So hopefully there should be a few more to come in. Should we carry on?
Yeah, we've got some good responses there. We can see there's a good few brokers on Protect Our Employees and then other.
Interested to know what other is.
If you are part of the 28% that has answered other, if you can comment in the comments box and just let us know what your profession is and why you're on the call today.
Okay, let's move on.
So the second sort of participation we want to get is we want to understand who has a policy in place for slips, trips and falls. If you're an employee and you're unaware if your company has one, then please select no or not sure. Or if you're 100% confident your company does have a policy in place for slips, trips and falls, then please select yes. This is one of the questions that we were really interested in. That's why we decided to start off the call today with this question.
Kind of what we want to see.
Sure, I've seen one. Okay. That's good. There seems to be some level of slips, trips and falls policies in place.
It's like the responses might have dried up. Should we carry on?
Policy or procedure. If it's a procedure, we just had a question come in the chat, policy or procedure. Either if it's a policy or a procedure, just answer yes. Okay, so it's good to see that yes is looking like it's coming out on top there, which is pleasing to see. Okay, I think they dried up there, Matt. We'll move on.
Let's get started.
So throughout this session, we will explore the importance of managing slips, trips and falls in the workplace, and we will also look at some compelling stats to help you understand the scale of the problem. But it's also important that you understand some of the regulations and legislation around slips, trips and falls. Some examples are on the screen now. For anyone that's dialing in to the call from outside of the UK, please note that these are UK specific. So the Health and Safety at Work Act that you see at the top there, this requires employers to ensure the health and safety of their employees and anyone else affected by their work, so far as is reasonably practicable. And that phrase just means you need to balance up the level of risk against the measures needed to control the risk in terms of money, time and effort. Regulation 3 of the Management of Health and Safety Work Regulations builds on the Health and Safety at Work Act, and it includes duties on employees to assess the risks, and this includes slips, trips and falls, and then take any action where necessary. Regulation 12 of the Workplace Regulations, this requires floors to be suitable, in good condition and free from obstructions, so people should be able to move around the premises freely and safely. The common law duty of care. So under the common law, employers owe duty of care to their employees and others who may be on their premises. And others is quite important here, and we will touch on this later. They must take reasonable steps to ensure the workplace is safe and free from hazards. So an employer can be found negligent if they fail to provide a safe working environment, and then this results in injury. And any injured person can then pursue a civil claim for compensation if they can prove that the employer breached that duty. So these are the four main ones. However, there are a few more that indirectly relate to slips, trips and falls. So just be aware of that. So 2024, and everyone loves a bit of data or statistics. So these are some stats that we pulled from the HSE website for the year 2022, 2023. And as you can see, 561,000 non-fatal workplace injuries were reported for that period. Of those, 179,520 people were injured as a result of a slip, trip, or fall. And that means that 32%, which is nearly a third of all non-fatal work-related accidents that resulted in injury, were as a result of a slip, trip, and fall. So that's quite a significant number. The food and drink industry is highest on the list for frequency of slips and trips. And that's not really surprising. If you've ever been to a restaurant or in the kitchen of a restaurant, there's staff that are rushing around with plates, with drinks, and there's also the time constraints for food. They need to get orders out quickly, so there's always that potential for a slip, trip, or fall due to contaminants on the floor, such as food or liquid. Also, with regard to falls, a third of reported fall accidents occur on stairs, and this is often due to poor lighting or damaged stairs themselves. So this is just some stats to highlight the scale of the issue. Even though, as I said before, large resources have been geared towards reducing slips, trips, and falls, they are very much still prevalent in today's working environment and the environment as a whole.
Okay, so to effectively prevent slips, trips and falls, it's essential we first understand the root causes of these incidents. Typically fall into three categories as highlighted on screen. So we have human factors, environmental hazards, and then organisational issues. So starting with human factors, there are many reasons, obviously, why humans or human behaviour may be considered a factor when it comes to any accident, not just slips, trips and falls. Starting with the acronym SCATE for competence on the left-hand side. Do employees have the necessary skills, knowledge, ability, training and experience to be where they are and be doing what they're doing at the time of an accident? This one obviously can't be gauged when we talk about members of the public, so it's really geared towards employers' liability. Then moving on to risk perception. A person's risk perception is really shaped by their past experiences, or can be the experience of someone close to them. You know, what can I expect to happen if I walk across this icy footpath? Some will do it, others won't. The question is why? For the people who take the risk, they may do so having never been a victim of a slip, trip or fall, nor knowing anyone who has been either. This is obviously quite unlikely, so may be shaped by the severity of injuries. If someone does not know anybody who has suffered any notable injury following a slip, trip or fall, then they are quite unlikely to give it the credence it may deserve and embark on taking that risk. On the flip side, however, if someone has suffered an injury or knows somebody who has, then it is much more likely that they can perceive that risk to be a real one and will then take the greater precautions to avoid it happening to them. To change one's perception often, unfortunately, takes an accident or serious incident. So we would always encourage businesses to use real life examples where you can when providing training to staff. And if the resources are available, it's good to bring in a speaker, for example, who has suffered a serious injury as a result of a slip, trip or fall, just to get that message across. Then moving on to personality or attitude. Does the employee dislike the work environment and are feeling particularly unmotivated? Personality may not be changed, however, attitudes can be changed over time with a good work environment and a strong safety culture. Then finally, on to personal circumstance. So staff may be under pressure to fulfill an order, meaning they cut corners, and issues outside of work can also hinder performance. Unfortunately, you may not know this, or the full picture, may not be quite clear, but personal issues can lead to fatigue and distractions that cause oversights, and then unfortunately the accidents occur. People's physical condition do also change over time, either permanently or temporarily. So injuries such as sport injuries may make it more difficult to move around in a safe way, or climbing steps could be more difficult, and even balance could be affected. Substance abuse is another one, both legal and illegal. It is at an all-time high and it needs to be factored in. Substances can have side effects, including dizziness, fatigue, blurred vision, which all kind of hamper the safety at work. So all of these are real contributors to accidents, and any accident investigation following a slip, trip or fall should consider all of these elements when trying to determine the true cause.
So environmental hazards then, these are physical conditions in the workplace that contribute towards slips, trips and falls. And it's important to recognise that these hazards can be present in any work environment. That's from offices to retail through to construction sites. So addressing them actually requires an element of attention to detail. There's a few on the screen now. So if you think about wet or oily surfaces, this could be from damaged roofs or guttering, which causes leaks. You could have liquid spills in your canteen areas. It could be grease or oil in industrial settings, particularly if you've got vehicle maintenance units, or even diesel spills in petrol stations. So you should be carrying out regular roof inspections as well as gutter cleans, and use drip trays if required. Also providing spill kits with absorbent mats or other granular materials just to help soak up any spill that does occur. But it's also important to have people instructed on how to deal with spillages, so having spillage procedures in place is key. With regards to uneven flooring then, you could have raised floor tiles, uneven walkways, loose or even raised carpet edges, which cause trip hazards. So regular inspections help identify these and then taking prompt action to rectify once they have been identified. Obstructed walkways then, think about your trailing cables in your office spaces, items obstructing your walkways, ladders or boxes on the top, bottom, or even on the stairways themselves. So having a proper cable management system in place is important. Having dedicated storage areas for your equipment so you're not cluttering up those walkways. And again, carrying out regular housekeeping inspections. Inadequate lighting is another environmental factor that you need to consider. So dim or defective lighting on stairs or changes in elevation, poorly lit car parks. Think about warehouses as well. Sometimes these are not as bright as your normal work environment. So what you should be doing is installing bright and consistent lighting, especially in those high traffic or high risk areas. Think about your fire escape routes and your emergency lighting. So they should be maintained and inspected regularly, because these routes are used in the event of an emergency. And if it is an emergency, people are more than likely going to be panicking or rushing. And these are factors that feed into why people slip, trip or fall. Changes in elevation is another one. So think about unexpected steps, ramps, or even curbs that are not clearly marked. So you should be using signage to warn people of the upcoming hazard. But also you need to ensure that that signage is correctly maintained. How many times do you come across signage that is faded or damaged or even facing in the wrong direction? So as mentioned previously as well, proper lighting to cover the hazard in that change of elevation. Also, any change in elevation should be marked with contrasting colours, again, just to highlight that risk and make it obvious to people who are passing. Another environmental factor that we're used to in the UK, rain, ice or snow making outdoor areas slippery, particularly car parks, pathways and the entrances to your buildings. So you should have a winter weather procedure and a risk assessment in place. And this procedure should lay out the roles and responsibilities of your staff, and these should be clearly communicated. It's important with this then to have a responsible person identified for spreading salt or grit. Otherwise, there may be ambiguity and the risk that someone does not carry out this task for whatever reason. And that means then that we're going to be left with unsafe walking routes, and it only takes that one time for an accident or a claim to occur. If you do have a dedicated person for spreading salt and grit, then they need to know how to correctly spread the salt or grit, what locations to grit, and then when they're going to grit. So there's no point in spreading salt or grit in lower footfall areas first and neglecting your main transit routes, because these will be your high risk areas. If you do use a third party for spreading, then ensure that they have an up-to-date grit plan and make sure that it has all your areas of responsibilities clearly marked. If there is changes in those areas of responsibilities, then the grit plan should be reviewed and updated as accordingly. Floor contaminants then, think about dust, powders, sawdust, food, liquids, rubbish. Anything that doesn't belong on the floor will be considered a contaminant, and that can increase the risk of a slip, trip or fall. So again, as we mentioned previously, you should be carrying out regular housekeeping inspections. You could implement a clean as you go policy, or even just placing temporary signage or barriers out around that contamination until the area is clear. This should all help to reduce the risk of a slip, trip or fall. Inappropriate flooring materials, these are more common than you would think. Think about slippery tiles in restrooms or kitchens, or polished floors in reception areas where you will have a high and frequent footfall. So it's important that you use anti-slip or slip-resistant materials or coatings in those areas, and especially in your higher risk areas. If you're unsure, you can always carry out a slip resistance test, which will help you to identify any problem areas in your building or organization. The final one then, outdoor hazards, there are many. So how often have we seen leaves on walkways, overgrown plants or bushes that overlap the footpath? Potholes in car parks is always a big one, or even raised tree roots cracking the pavement, which then creates a tripping hazard. If you're responsible for an outdoor area, then you should be conducting external inspections and maintenance at the same frequency as you do internally. You should always ensure the paths are clear and free of debris and defects, and particularly pay attention in the winter months. Think about contaminants that we spoke about earlier, and due to high winds, these can be blown into your parking space, your service yard or whatever. Also, water can enter into cracks in the pavement, and then with a drop in temperature, this can cause that water to expand, which then lifts and cracks the pavement, creating trip hazards. Potholes, if you have them, should be regularly filled as a temporary measure, but you should consider resurfacing the area if that problem persists. We touched on signage a few times there, so it's important to know that signage can be a double-edged sword. If it's placed out as a temporary measure, say during cleaning, it's important that once that hazard is cleared, the floor has dried, that signage is then removed. Otherwise, what you're going to have is you're going to have a wet floor signage on a dry floor, and then that sign then loses its meaning or its purpose, and complacency sets in with your staff. That means that the risk is then increased. So always remember with your signage to deploy it correctly, and if it's not needed, then take it back in. So the final factor that we want to cover is organizational factors, and these are broader systematic problems within the organization that will contribute to slips, trips or falls. So understanding these will allow you to target your prevention efforts more effectively. By not providing suitable training means that your employees may be aware of they must be unaware of how to identify hazards, and they might not understand the risk that they face or have insufficient knowledge of the safe system of work that you've deployed. You should be providing your staff with information on training on the tasks that they're required to do, and this should include findings from your risk assessments, the controls that you've put in place to protect them, as well as the SOPs or safe systems of work. If safety is not priority and production targets are more important, then this will lead to a poor safety culture over time. And if you do have a poor safety culture, then it's more likely that you're going to have accidents in your workplace. So you should be fostering a safety first culture and ensure that your senior leadership are the ones communicating this and communicating the importance of health and safety in the workplace. You should also encourage your employees to report hazards, and then it's very important to take action once those hazards have been reported. There's no point communicating the importance of health and safety from the top down and then turning a blind eye to unsafe work or not carrying out remedial works once hazards have been identified. You should have clear policies and procedures around slips, trips and falls, as well as clear and consistent procedures for housekeeping and dealing with spillages or defects. A lack of supervision within the work area can lead to unsafe behaviours going unnoticed, and supervision should form part of what you do as an organisation, particularly around those higher risk tasks. Supervisors as well should have experience and some level of training with regards to how to identify hazards in that workspace. Poor incident or reporting procedures are another organisational factor to consider. If employees are not encouraged to or are unaware of how to report minor incidents or accidents, then this is more than likely going to lead to accidents at some stage going forward. Maintenance schedules should be in place and actions should be prioritised and closed out in a timely manner. Delaying remedial works will lead to increased risk, as will substandard work. So it's always important to use competent and reliable contractors for all your maintenance work. Also, always check the work area before the work is signed off. Do not just assume that the work is up to standard or that the area has been left in a safe way. The workplace layout then, a poorly designed workplace can also increase the risk. Walking through other departments, potentially bringing contamination onto the floor. There may be obstacles in place, particularly in high traffic routes. You really need to have clear, unobstructed walkways, as we covered previously. You should not really have to climb over or under anything to get to your area of work. Workload pressures then, I'm sure a lot of people will be aware of this. We kind of touched on this earlier when we said production can come before safety, meaning employees are rushing due to tight deadlines, increasing the likelihood of trips or falls. So you should set realistic expectations, and you should be encouraging your employees to work at a safe pace and avoid over-assigning excessive workloads if you can. Communication gaps are another one, and we come across this one quite frequently. So this can occur between different departments or shifts. You may work in an industry where you don't really see your employees much due to travel. They may be out on the road Monday to Friday, etc. Or you may employ someone who does not speak great English. You must ensure that everyone gets the same level of communication. Make sure it's regular and everyone understands what is being communicated. If you need to get it translated, then do so, but make sure everything is communicated and fully understood by your staff. You want to avoid anything falling between two stools, really, and you may need to find a way to just suit your individual business. So as you can see there on the right hand side, just on the diagram, by not providing your staff with adequate training and instruction, you're going to set the standard for a poor health and safety culture, which will in turn lead to increased accident rates. However, by having clear policies and procedures that include suitable information, instruction, and adequate training, as well as a suitable and sufficient risk assessment process in place, then this can help you on your journey to preventing accidents in your workplace.
Okay, so leading on to identifying hazards and conducting risk assessments. With a clear understanding of the causes, the next step is to identify specific hazards in your own workplace and conduct thorough risk assessments. This is an important part of that whole proactive safety management approach. Hazard identification should be a systematic process that involves multiple methods. So regular workplace inspections are a fundamental tool in this process. During these inspections, look for common hazards such as spills, uneven flooring, loose cables, or poor lighting that we've already touched on. These inspections, though, should both be scheduled and unscheduled to get an accurate picture of the workplace conditions, and then record the findings of your inspections and use this to conduct periodic trend analysis going forward. In addition to inspections, reviewing incident reports and near-miss data can provide valuable insights. Often these reports highlight recurring issues or previously unnoticed hazards that will need to be addressed. And engaging employees in this hazard identification is also really important. So encourage your employees to report potential hazards and provide suggestions for improving safety. This can improve the overall health and safety culture over time if staff feel they're raising issues and can see that action is actually being taken to address them. So once hazards have been identified, the next step leads on to conducting the risk assessment. This involves evaluating each hazard in terms of its severity, which, as most will know, the potential impact of an incident if it were to occur, and then against its likelihood, the probability that the incident will actually happen. And the goal is to prioritise these risks so that you can focus time and resource on the most significant threats first. An example would be a spill in a high traffic area, which presents both that high likelihood of causing an incident and then the potential for severe consequences, making it that top priority for immediate action. And documenting the process is absolutely vital. It provides a record that the identified risks and then the measures taken to address them, which is important for the compliance as well as any future reviews. And you may wish to use a slip resistance test, as David mentioned earlier, as part of your risk assessment.
So the risk assessments, Matt just touched on them there. Why are they important for you and why, as insurance companies, we insist on them? As insurers, we require our clients to conduct a thorough risk assessment. This usually involves reviewing the workplace layout, the employee tasks, and then identifying any high-risk areas such as your plant rooms, kitchens, or changes in elevation. This just gives us an insight into how you as a business manage your risk. And it allows us to feel comfortable that you've identified all foreseeable risk and therefore you've taken measures to eliminate or reduce. And this is what we ultimately want. Also, maybe worth noting that if a claim is notified, this is potentially one of the first documents that our claims team will ask for when reviewing that claim and deciding whether it is defendable or not. Ensure that the person who's carrying out the risk assessment has the competence to do so. So if it's internal, if it's an internal member of your staff, you may need to provide them with additional training. And also, if you're using a third-party contractor, then please ensure that they have professional indemnity insurance in place. With regards to the steps that must be taken when completing a risk assessment, then this may be new to some of you, it may not to others. You need to identify the hazards first, and how you can do this: simply walk in the workplace and having a look for what may cause harm to you or your staff. Speak with your employees, as they can be a good source of information, and some will have experience and may be able to provide you with some valuable insight. You can also review previous accident, incident, or near miss data. So has there been a previous incident or near miss with regards to slip, trip and fall in that work area? The key here, though, is to focus on the significant hazards and try to avoid the trivial. The second thing you must do is decide who may be harmed and how. You need to look beyond your workforce here. Think about contractors coming to the site for maintenance, members of the public, customers, general visitors, and often overlooked here is trespassers. Remember the common law duty of care from the start of this presentation. You also owe duty of care to trespassers who may be on your premises for criminal purposes. And it has been known for criminals to sue companies from jail due to injuries they sustained when committing a crime for which they were in prison for. So you need to consider everyone, not just your employees. The third step then is to evaluate the risk and decide on appropriate control measures. So you can use the HSE 5x5 matrix for this. So the likelihood times severity will then give you a risk rating. You need to consider the adequacy of your current control measures if you have any in place. So things like physical controls, barriers, anti-slip flooring, as well as any training or PP that you provide to your staff. If you employ 5 or more people, then your risk assessment must be written down. This is a legal requirement here in the UK. If you have less than 5, you must still do a risk assessment. It just means that you don't need to write it down, although I would always personally recommend that you do so. I have come across previous instances where people have indicated that they have less than 5 employees, so therefore they are not obliged to write the risk assessment, but when questioned on the risk and the controls, they have been unable to provide sufficient information. So also make sure that your risk assessment is accessible. It should not be a document that just collects dust and only comes out once an insurance claim has been notified. Also, make sure that you communicate your significant findings with staff and make them aware of any residual risk that is still in place. Finally, the last step is to review your risk assessment and update it if required. We would recommend at least an annual review, but your risk assessment must be reviewed following any accidents, near misses, changes to workplace processes, layout, or the introduction of new equipment or machinery. You may also employ new staff, so you may want to carry out a review there. Also worth noting, if you're an organisation that operates a point of work risk assessment, so this is an assessment undertaken by your staff at the physical point of their work, the same steps apply. You must also check that they're completing a point of work risk assessment each time and it's being documented. Each site will present its own hazards with regards to slips, trips or falls, so appropriate controls will need to be implemented. Matt will now cover the hierarchy of controls.
Yeah, so for those who haven't seen this before, when addressing slips, trips and falls in the workplace, it's important that you follow the hierarchy of controls on the right-hand side there. This guides us through the most effective strategies for reducing risks, starting with the most impactful measures. So we'll go through each level of control in detail now, starting with elimination, which is best, and working our way down to the personal protective equipment. So number 1, elimination, most effective method of controlling hazards because it involves completely removing the risk from the workplace in the first instance. So when it comes to slips, trips and falls, this might mean redesigning workflows or the physical workspace to remove the hazard entirely. If a certain area of the workplace is prone to wet conditions, for example, eliminating the need for workers to enter that area could significantly reduce the risk. It could also involve automating a process, using machinery to handle that task instead of manual labour, and then relocating any task to a safer environment. So second, we have substitution. If the elimination isn't feasible, this would be the next step, which involves replacing a hazardous condition with a safer alternative. So for slips, trips and falls, substitution might mean using materials or processes that are less likely to create those hazards. If a certain cleaning product, for example, leaves a slippery residue, you could switch to a product that is equally effective, but less likely to cause that slip. Another example could be replacing old uneven flooring with a newer slip resistant surface. Then on to engineering controls. These are physical modifications to the workplace that reduce or eliminate exposure to hazards. So again, for slips, trips and falls, this can include installing non-slip flooring in areas where water or other liquids are present, designing walkways with gradual slopes instead of steps to eliminate that trip hazard, or improving lighting throughout the workplace to ensure everything is clearly visible. And then another effective engineering control is the installation of guardrails or handrails in areas where falls are a risk, such as on stairs or elevated platforms. For administration controls, these involve changing the way people work to reduce risk. So these don't eliminate the hazards, but instead focus on safer practices, procedures, and policies. Examples would include implementing regular cleaning schedules to ensure that floors remain dry and free of debris, using signs to warn employees of temporary hazards such as wet floors or construction zones, and then developing policies that require immediate reporting of hazards so they can be addressed quickly. Training programs also fall under the administrative controls. So employees should be regularly trained on how to recognize the hazards, use the equipment properly, and then follow the safe working practices to avoid slips, trips and falls. And then finally, PPE, personal protective equipment. If the previous controls cannot fully eliminate the risk, PPE provides that very last line of defense. And in the context of slips, trips and falls, this could include slip resistant footwear, especially environments where floors may be wet or oily. PPE could also include knee pads for workers who spend a lot of time on the floor, or harnesses for those people working at heights. And then while PPE is essential, it is important to remember that it's the least effective control because it relies on the correct and consistent use by your employees. And it should always be used in conjunction with the other control measures noted above. And then by systematically applying all of these controls, starting with the elimination, working down to the final PPE, we should be able to significantly reduce the risk of slips, trips and falls in the workplace, with each layer of control adding that additional level of protection and ensuring that any hazards are minimized as much as they can be. So then moving on to inspections. So I'm going to work around the wheel here and talk a bit about each aspect. So starting with training, the first thing we want to ensure is that all staff or the person who is undertaking any health and safety inspection in the workplace are adequately trained to do so. So this may require upskilling. An IOSH Managing Safely or a NEBOSH General Certificate course would enable them to have the ability to see and understand what is a hazard and what may actually cause harm. The next thing is how regular they are. So it's important to carry out your inspections of the workplace regularly, and the frequency of these should be dependent on the risk assessment. It's always good to carry out frequent scheduled inspections, but as we touched on earlier, unscheduled inspections, where you may actually get a better idea of what the workplace looks like day to day when staff are not expecting the inspection to take place. Checklists are useful, so consider using comprehensive checklists during the inspection, which may consider floor conditions, lighting adequacy, walkways, are they clear, safety signage, are wet floor signs available, are they where needed, and as David said, removed when they're not needed, and then stairs and ramps, ensure that they are safe and well marked. Then the coverage needs to be comprehensive. So inspections must cover all areas of the workplace. That's the high traffic zones, like entrances, kitchens, and then your lower traffic areas as well, storage areas, stairwells, for example. And don't forget the external areas like car parks, footpaths, and your external fire escapes. Especially, the way we said in UK with the poorer weather conditions. Then you have your corrective actions to ensure the identified hazards are immediately addressed if they can be, fix temporary hazards, clean spills, place warning signs, remove wet floor signs, repair defective surfaces such as potholes, raised drains, and then your larger issues, create an action plan for repair and ensure that progress is tracked. Set realistic timescales as well and understand what resources may be needed to correct the action. Employee engagement, where possible, it's always great to include employees in the inspection or hazard spotting exercises. Employees should be actively encouraged as well to report near misses, hazards, and unsafe working practices that may lead to a slip, trip or fall. This, increases the awareness and helps identify risks that might have been missed during inspection. And then finally, touch on the importance of documenting everything and ensuring it's accessible too. So very important for claims defensibility. If a claim comes in for slips, trips or fall, it is very important to show that there is a schedule of inspection in place, dates, times and locations, and any actions highlighted must be noted down. The records should be easily accessible as well. So it's important you have a login system in place to ensure that they are retrievable if and when they are required.
So corrective actions then, we've all had them. Matt touched on them in the previous slide. So a gap has been identified following an inspection, an audit or an accident, and this needs to be addressed. It's important to address hazards quickly to prevent slips, trips and falls from occurring. For example, if there's a spill on the floor, clean it up immediately, or if there's an obstruction in a walkway, simply just remove it. However, it's important to understand why this gap occurred and work towards preventing this going forward. So thinking about longer term solutions that may involve permanent fixes like barriers or resurfacing pavements and car parks, or even installing better lighting where it's deemed to be poor or inadequate. In some cases though, temporary controls such as temporary barriers and signage might be necessary while you work and get the resources gathered to implement those longer term solutions. With regards to accountability and follow-up, it's important to assign an action owner, somebody that's going to take responsibility of that action, but it's also important that you don't just choose anybody. Choose someone with the knowledge and expertise to close out that action. If an action is not assigned, it will probably not get closed, or at the very least, it will take a longer period of time. After correction actions are assigned into that responsible person, they should be given a time frame, and then the progress towards that needs to be monitored. But also be realistic with those timescales. But also, while you're being realistic, the timescale needs to reflect the level of risk. So those higher risk tasks should be closed out quicker than something that's a lower risk. With regards to documenting and reporting, and make sure all corrective actions are documented, and this includes reporting what the defect was, what corrective action was taken, and the date that action was closed out. This documentation can be important for insurance purposes if a claim is raised. So continuous improvement then, corrective actions, this gives you the opportunity to continuously improve by assessing how effective your remedial works were and then making adjustments where required. And as insurers, we love to work with clients who always strive for continuous improvement. There's a few do's on the right hand side, as you can see, so just take note of those as well.
Okay, so when managing risks like today's slips, trips and falls, there are two important concepts to understand. We have the principles of prevention and then hierarchy of controls. So the principles of prevention are general rules that help guide how businesses should think about safety. They kind of encourage things like avoiding risk whenever possible and then taking steps to protect everyone, not just the individual. The hierarchy of controls that we touched on earlier is a practical tool used during risk assessments. It helps you decide the best steps to take, from completely removing a hazard to using protective equipment. So in short, the principles of prevention guide the overall approach to safety, while the hierarchy of controls show you the specific actions to take to control risk. So I'm just going to run through the hierarchy on the right here. So avoid risks, eliminate hazards where possible. As we said earlier, redesigning workflows to remove unnecessary risks, could be automating tasks in a high risk area. Then we have evaluate risks, assess the likelihood and severity of hazards. This really is that risk assessment process that we talked through. And again, prioritize risks that present the greatest danger to employees and operations. The higher the risk, the higher up on the to-do list it should be. But don't forget about the quick wins. Although they're lower risk, we can get them done quickly. Try and combat risks at source, so address hazards directly at their origin to prevent them from spreading or escalating. So repair a defective floor, replace that missing paved slab. This is much better than displaying that warning sign. Then adapt to any technological progress. So try and stay up to date with advances in safety technology that can actually help mitigate risks. This can result in an improved and much safer work environment. We'll touch on a few technological advancements a bit later on, but smart flooring is an example of this. Then try and replace any dangerous practices. So substitute hazardous processes or materials with those safer alternatives where possible. And that also forms part of the risk assessment steps that we discussed earlier. Then develop a coherent prevention policy, taking a holistic approach to the control of risk, and one that includes the consideration of the organisation, the system, the job, task analysis, and the individual, so those human factors. Try and prioritise collective protective measures. So implement measures that protect everyone, those handrails, the non-slip mats, rather than relying solely on personal protective equipment. And then provide clear information and training to your employees. So ensure that they have access to up-to-date training and information on hazard prevention and reporting, making them fully aware of risk assessment and controls at the induction stage, and then going forward, providing toolbox talks and sharing any root causes of accidents. Always remember though, it's not just, throwing that wet floor sign on the left there up in an area where there may be water. We can and must do more than that. Okay, so that leads us on to our first case study. So we're going to try and touch on some real life examples that our claims team have been dealing with. This is going to be a Slido exercise here, so please have your phones ready. But this example, we have the insured business of a retail store. There was a claimant that sustained severe personal injuries when they tripped over a large pothole in the car park of the store. The claimant fell going over on their right ankle and was unable to stand afterwards. So this resulted in a sprain type injury to the right ankle with ongoing functional instability, pain and restriction. So here's our first Slido for the case studies. Do you think liability was admitted or denied in this particular case? Slight split in responses, but majority thinking that it was. I'll give it a few more seconds for any late entries. Okay, so about 80% think yes. And that is correct. So the investigation showed that the pothole posed a hazard on the insured's property. The insured were unable to provide the necessary documentation, such as inspection records, which are clearly essential to prove that the land was regularly checked for hazards, including the identified pothole. So why it was admitted, we had a lack of documentation. The store failed to produce the inspection records necessary. The hazard, pothole posed a clear hazard on the insured's property, and its presence was not properly managed. To have a breach of duty, the store did not take reasonable steps to keep the premises safe for both visitors and staff, and the accident was foreseeable. So on to case study 2.
So yeah, we've just got another one here. So again, it's a retail store, and the circumstances where a member of the public was walking from their car into the store and slipped on freshly fallen snow. The store had gritted the area as part of their ready to trade checklist. The injury sustained then was a fractured ankle with pain and an inability for the claimant to walk on the injured leg. So as before, do you think that liability was admitted or denied in the case, just going off the information that we've provided? So to rephrase the question, do you think liability was admitted? So we've got some good responses there. No seems to be the leading answer so far. Just give a few more seconds in case anyone else.
Okay, we'll move on, shall we?
Yeah. So liability was denied in this case. The investigation that was undertaken, CCTV footage was provided of the lead up to the incident, and the footage shows that the claimant made their way to the entrance. They were busy on their phone and failed to pay significant attention to the surroundings or the prevailing weather conditions. Given the weather, the claimant should have exercised greater caution. Furthermore, as we mentioned on the previous slide, the store had gritted the area as part of its ready to trade checklist, and this demonstrated the necessary steps. So they did take some proactive steps to grit that area, and as a result of that, the claimant failed to exercise caution in adverse weather conditions, and that claim or liability was not admitted in this case. So just to conclude on those case studies above, if you're doing what you should be doing, your documentation is up to date, it's accessible, it's adequate, and then it's provided to our claims department in a timely manner, then there's every chance that liability can be denied and a successful defence of a claim can take place.
So this nicely takes us to claims defensibility and some of the documentation required by our own claims department. So whilst all claims are case specific and not all the information detailed on this pretty busy slide will be requested in every case, this is a list of the documents and evidence that we routinely ask for. So I'm not going to read out everything on the slide, but there's a few vital ones highlighted in bold, which aren't particularly clear, but they are there. So kind of as shown in the previous example, or the CCTV can be very useful in claims defensibility, and the incident may be captured in real time, showing exactly what happened. Also, you got your inspection and cleaning records. So both examples were previously highlighted, and the importance in being able to prove that your necessary inspections and steps have been taken to mitigate the risk as far as they can be. And then also we've got claimants' training records, which are also important to show employees have been given the required competence to be carrying out, undertaking whatever they are actually doing. It is important that you're able to provide this information promptly, as it does give us the best chance to defend any claims or reduce the overall impact of that claim.
So a bit of communication and training then. To effectively prevent slips, trips and falls in your workplace, it's also important to focus on communication and training that is specific to these hazards. Without clear communication and thorough training, then your management system can fall short. And good communication helps to make employees aware of specific risks within their work environment. But how you manage this will totally depend on the structure of your organization. For example, if you have staff on site, then your communication may be a little bit easier. But if you have staff who are out on the road quite a lot, then it can be a bit more difficult. Just moving on to the communication piece then, you should encourage the use of daily briefings or toolbox talks to help keep safety at the top of their mind for your employees. And this is particularly effective at the beginning of each day or at the beginning of each working shift, because this gets the safety message across right early into that shift and at the top of the mind. The sessions of your daily briefs, they can be varied. They can cover recent accidents or near misses, maybe upcoming or planned work that may present additional hazards, or any other reminders on key safety messages that you want to get across. It's also a good development piece for junior leaders or supervisors, as they can be the ones delivering the brief, and this just increases their confidence and their awareness of the hazards. Incident near miss reporting, you should be establishing clear lines of communication so that employees can easily report incidents or near misses. And I must stress the word easy here. If something takes too long or it's cumbersome, then it's likely that staff will not always report. So you also may have drivers out on the road who have a near miss with a slip, let's say on the back of a trailer on a Monday. You want this reported quickly, because come Friday, it may have been forgotten about and it may not be at the forefront of their mind, and then that's information and data that you've now lost, and that could help you identify areas for improvement. You could use visual aids such as signage in high-risk areas to remind employees of the potential hazards they face. You could use wet floor signs in areas prone to wet floors. You can display posters showing proper lifting techniques to help prevent falls, or you can display pictures on notice boards to show examples of maybe correct cable management, so the right way can be done and the wrong way be done. So some good examples and some poor examples. You could even display pictures on notice boards of where someone had tripped or fallen over an obstruction, and then again this just highlights the hazards that are in the workplace and brings that to the front of everyone's minds. High risk areas, then the level of communication will depend on the level of risk. Quite clearly, higher risk areas should have more daily briefs, easier reporting mechanism, and a greater number of visual aids. Safety signs in areas where slips, trips and falls are most likely to occur, such as entrances, staircases, or even uneven floors or wet surfaces. This just ensures that employees are warned and are particularly cautious in around these areas or zones. With regards to training then, you should be providing all your staff with training, and this should be initial induction training, also ongoing development, and the training should cover slips, trips and falls and what to do and what not to do. With regards to induction training then, it must be provided when new employees join the business, and it's important that the induction does cover slips, trips and fall hazards in their primary workplace and any other areas that they may work. It just means that the importance of induction training just means that everyone starts off with a solid understanding of the common risks that they face and the safety procedures that you have in place to protect them. Induction training records should be retained and made available on request should a claim be made. It does form some of that documentation that Matt covered in the previous slides about documentation that is requested. Some of the common hazards then, training should include information on specific types of hazards employees may encounter, such as snow or ice, wet floors, uneven surfaces, and poor lighting, which are leading causes of slips, trips and falls. Clearly, if these hazards are in your organisation, then they should have been rectified at this stage following your suitable and sufficient risk assessment, but you may have employees who work on customer sites or who are out on the road for large periods of time. You can get a build-up of ice on the back of HGV trailers. You may have staff delivering items that need to be carried into customers' homes or businesses, which again increases the risk of slips, trips and falls. You may also operate cold stores or food production areas where floors can be wet or slippery, so the risk that your staff face will be varied, and their training should cover the controls that you have in place. With regards to specific training, then we'd always recommend that you tailor the training to your employee's role. For example, a warehouse worker or someone delivering to a customer's site might need more focused training on manual handling and navigating difficult areas whilst handling items. So they will also need to know how to conduct a suitable and sufficient point of work risk assessments and what controls to implement. They will also need to know what procedures to follow if they come across icy or snow covered walkways. On the other hand, office workers should know all about cable management, good housekeeping, and the correct reporting procedures for defects. The more specific that you can make the training to an individual's workplace, the more engaged it will be, which should result in a more effective learning module. Training should also never be a one-time exercise. Over time, even the most well-trained and experienced employees can become complacent and forgetful about the risks, the hazards, and the procedures that they're supposed to follow. So refresher training serves as a reminder. And this just ensures that safety remains a priority in day-to-day operations. Also, if you have a high staff turnover, then carrying out regular refresher training can help to ensure that everyone is up to date. And as with everything else that we've covered, it's also important to ensure that refresher training is recorded in the same way as induction training or any other training that you provide your staff.
Okay, so implementing safety measures is only the first step, and ongoing monitoring and evaluation are important to ensure measures are effective and that any new risks are identified and addressed promptly. So establishing performance indicators is part of this process. These might include the number of slips, trips and falls incidents reported, the frequency of safety audits or employee participation in safety training programs. And by tracking these metrics, you can assess whether your safety initiatives are having that desired impact. Regular inspections and safety audits are also vital. These should be conducted not only to ensure compliance with own procedures, but also to identify any new and emerging hazards. For example, a routine inspection might reveal that the newly installed piece of equipment has actually created a trip hazard, which can then be addressed before the inevitable incident occurs. Then analysing incident and near-miss data, which is another powerful tool for improving safety further. By examining the data, you can identify patterns or trends that might not be immediately apparent. For example, if you notice that most slip incidents occur in a particular area of your facility, this could indicate a problem with the flooring or drainage in that specific area. In addition to tracking the quantitative data, it's important to gather qualitative feedback from your employees as well. So encourage them to report any concerns or suggestions that they have for improving safety further. This not only helps to identify potential hazards, but also fosters a sense of ownership and involvement in the overall safety process, meaning you must provide them with a way of actually reporting it. And this should always be simple. So using technology, if you have the resource, can be very useful. But ensure that all reports are recorded in a way that the data can then be fully scrutinized afterwards. And then the goal of monitoring and evaluation is not just to react to incidents, but to actually anticipate and prevent them from happening in the first place. And by continuously assessing the effectiveness of your safety measures and making the adjustments as and when they're required, you can further ensure that your workplace remains safe and compliant.
So unfortunately, even with your best efforts, things may still go wrong. And if they do, it's important to understand what happened and why, so that you can then take action to prevent another accident. It's not just accidents that can be investigated, though. As good practice, we would also recommend you investigate your more serious near misses. And a good investigation should uncover the root cause. Anything short of this means that the control measures that you implement to prevent recurrence won't have the desired effect. So it starts off with the reporting of the incident or the near miss, and the procedures in place for reporting should be defined within your management system. Having these reported promptly is key. So without this, incidents may go unnoticed or unresolved. If you're not aware of it, then how can you investigate? This is why we mentioned earlier about employees being encouraged to report all accidents and near misses, no matter how big or small. This is easier employees work in a set location, as I mentioned earlier, and it's a little bit more difficult if you do have employees out on the road, because again, a slip, trip or fall on a Monday may well have been forgotten about on a Friday. So the emphasis should be on a simple means of reporting while you've got workers or drivers that are not at your base location. So the reporting also needs to be good. What you really want is detailed and accurate reporting, so that the accident form that you have in place should be specific to your organization and give you enough information to get your investigation up and running. The second part then is the accident investigation itself. So once the incident was reported, a thorough investigation can then take place to understand what exactly happened. It's important that the people involved in the investigation are competent to do so. So in slips, trips and falls, this may involve reviewing the physical environment, such as wet floors or obstructions, interviewing witnesses and reviewing CCTV footage if available. As Matt mentioned earlier, CCTV can be a great source of information, as it can give you a detailed account that sometimes you just can't get from witnesses. The goal here in the investigation is to gather as much information as possible to help you identify the direct cause of the incident. Once you've established the direct cause, then you want to move on to trying to establish what the root cause was. The direct cause, unfortunately, can sometimes be very obvious, and this can lead a poor investigation to just stop there. The problem may be solved, but that's what's really important here, is to focus on getting to that root cause. So many times, we ask what the root cause of an accident was, and we might get told it was human error or the employee was distracted. This may be the case for a small percentage of accidents or incidents, but distracted or not, if there was a raised paving slab that has not been repaired, or there is oil on the floor for prolonged periods, then there are deeper rooted problems that need to be addressed that go beyond human error. Simply knowing what happened isn't enough. What we want to know is why it happened. So as you can see in the diagram on the right hand side, for slips and trips and falls, you might ask the question, why did the employee slip? Well, because there was oil on the floor. Why was there oil on the floor? Because the machine was leaking oil. Why was the machine leaking oil? Because the machine seal was damaged. And then we asked the question, why wasn't the seal replaced? Because regular maintenance checks were not performed. And then you ask again, why weren't the maintenance checks done? Because there was no formal PPM schedule in place. So you need to ask why repeatedly until the root cause is identified. It would have been easy just to blame the oil and clean it up, maybe increase your housekeeping checks. However, with no PPM schedule in place, it's likely that machine will continue to leak oil, and therefore another accident will probably occur in the very near future. As part of your investigation, you may want to undertake a trend analysis before you implement your control measures. And this is because you may have had an accident at one location, but by collecting data from multiple incidents, you may notice that you have a wider issue across your organization. You don't need just to do this off the back of an incident, but by tracking information over time, you can then anticipate potential accidents and focus your efforts to help prevent them before they take place. To carry out a good trend analysis, then, you must first have the data available. For slips, trips and falls, this will require you to break them down individually, as this is easier to analyze if it's done in the the reporting stage. So if something is reported as a slip, trip or fall, you have to investigate further to determine which of the three it was. For anyone who's done this before, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. The more detail you have, the more detailed your analysis will be. So you want to be considering types of accidents, the dates, the times, the locations, the injuries sustained, were there any human, environmental or organizational factors that contribute towards that accident. So each piece of information you have helps to paint that picture. And when you have that full picture, your controls will definitely be more effective. With regards to your controls, then, based on the information that you've gathered, you can then implement your proactive control measures to prevent similar accidents from happening again. These can include engineering controls, like maybe you need to install non-slip flooring in problem areas. Maybe it can be admin controls, like establishing a formal PPM schedule to prevent oil leaks from machinery, or increasing the frequency of your housekeeping inspections. Once you've done all them, it's important to communicate the findings from the accident investigation. The goal here is to learn from each incident. You want to reduce the likelihood of it happening again, of course, and create a safer working environment. Also, to continuously improve your safety management system. Once your investigation is completed and recorded, you should be thinking about communicating the findings to your workforce. So, you know, what happened, why it happened, and what action you've taken to prevent your workforce from this happening again. This can be done during one of the sort of daily safety briefs that we touched on earlier. It can be a toolbox talk. It can be a health and safety committee meeting. However, how you choose to communicate this will be solely dependent on your organization. But it will also reinforce the importance in safety and remind your staff that things can and will go wrong if shortcuts are taken.
Okay, that leads us on to new technologies and leveraging them for enhancing safety. So technology is currently transforming how we approach workplace safety, offering newer tools and systems that can significantly reduce the risk of slips, trips and falls in the workplace. So starting with smart flooring, one of the most exciting developments in this area is that smart flooring technology. So these systems can actually detect moisture levels and other potential slip hazards in real time and alert employees before an incident occurs. This approach allows for immediate action. So as soon as you know about it, warning signs or drying the floor can take place before someone gets injured. Smart flooring is also very useful in care homes, for example, where you have vulnerable people or more vulnerable people to trips and falls, and it can also detect a motionless person. Public Health England has identified falls as the most common cause of death from injury in the over 65s and actually costs the NHS over £2 billion a year. Interestingly, a third of the UK population is now aged over 65. So the use of smart flooring, which has sensors embedded into it, is helping to address this massive problem. And the technology detects a fall as and when it occurs. So the typical kind of system tracks the motion and position of the resident relative to their position on the floor, and can tell if they're motionless or have just fallen. And then you have your alarms and notifications that can be activated and relayed to selected individuals' smartphones. We then move on to wearable safety devices, which are another new solution. So these devices can monitor an employee's movement patterns, actually their fatigue levels and even their posture. And then by analyzing this data, the system can provide alerts when it detects behaviors that might increase the risk of a fall, such as running or walking too quickly or carrying an awkward load. This can especially be useful in environments where employees are on their feet for longer periods or engaged in more physically demanding tasks. Then the third one up there on the slide is real-time hazard detection systems, which are becoming more and more common. So these systems use sensors and cameras to monitor the workplace for potential hazards, such as your usual spills or any debris on the floor. And then when that hazard is detected, the system can automatically alert the relevant personnel working in or around that area, or even it can trigger corrective actions such as closing off an area until it can be cleaned. And then finally, although they're not the most technologically advanced, a client of ours is currently utilising a pothole repair kit, which offers a pretty permanent and quick curing solution designed to repair potholes in roads, car parks, footpaths, highways and the like. And this product can cure within 20 minutes and is cold applied, meaning it does not require any hot works, heavy equipment or significant preparation, making it pretty easy, convenient and cost effective for immediate pothole repairing. So by integrating these technologies into your safety program, we can provide an additional layer of protection, helping to prevent incidents, hopefully before they actually occur in the first place. But it is important to remember these technologies should always complement and not replace those fundamental safety practices we've hopefully discussed and highlighted throughout this session. So regular inspections, employee training, and a strong safety culture are and always will be essential.
So to wrap up on some of that, then let's recap on some practical steps that you can take to help reduce slips, trips and falls in your workplace. These steps can be implemented immediately and will have a positive impact on safety within your workplace. First, ensure that all walkways are clear and free of obstructions. This is one of the simplest and most effective way to prevent trips. Make sure that cables, boxes and other items are stored correctly and not left in walkways where people tend to transit. Also carry out inspections of your external areas, paying particular attention to areas that have paving slabs, curbs and steps. Also, if you have trees planted, it may be worth keeping an eye on the road surface around those, as roots can cause the surface to raise over time and create a tripping hazard. Having a winter weather procedure can help you to prepare for cold snaps and may cause a buildup of snow or ice on the walkways, and this procedure should lay down the responsibilities for spreading grit or salt, where this is going to be spread and how, and any additional information staff need in order to arrive and leave work safely. How you manage this, of course, will be very dependent on your circumstances. Next, improve the lighting in all work areas. Poor lighting is a common factor in many slip, trips and falls accidents, so ensure that all areas are well lit and consider installing additional lighting in areas that are prone to hazards, such as stairways and outdoor steps or walkways. Implement regular cleaning schedules and keep floors dry and free of debris. Make sure that it is recorded, of course, and you should also consider using mats or other flooring materials that provide additional traction if you've got problem areas that have been identified. Signage is another tool for highlighting hazards and reducing incidents, but remember, it can be a double-edged sword if it's not deployed correctly. So use clear, visible signage to warn employees of the hazards. Make sure that these signs are placed in prominent locations and are easy to see and understand, and make sure that they are removed once the hazard has been cleared. For long-term success, it's important to implement ongoing training programs, so regular training ensures that employees are aware of the risks and how to avoid them. You can consider incorporating safety drills or real-life examples into your training programs to bring them to life. Remember, even with your best efforts, things can and have gone wrong, so carrying out a thorough accident investigation and a root cause analysis is key to help identify the real issue and help you implement control measures to help prevent recurrence. Leadership must also play a role in these efforts by demonstrating a commitment to safety and participating in safety initiatives. Leaders can then set the tone throughout the whole entire organization. Safety should be integrated into every aspect of the business, from a written policy to daily operations through to strategic planning for the future. Audits as well. Finally, you can conduct regular safety audits to ensure that your safety measures are effective, and these audits can help to identify areas where improvements are needed and ensure that your safety programs continue to evolve. This can be carried out internally, externally, or both, and then any corrective actions should be reviewed and closed out.
And then finally, to wrap up, this slide's just a bit about how Protector support management of slips, trips and falls. So we analyse workplace safety records and incident and claim data to determine premiums and coverage options. So we may or may not take a favourable view, but likely if a business that implements proven safety measures effectively, we're likely to take a more favourable view on that. And then just to touch on a few things we've been working on with our clients recently, which include providing resources and expertise to help develop robust risk management strategies, training such as today's webinars, or actually on-site training. We undertake post-loss reviews, and also slips, trips, falls specific reviews, and then your general casualty site surveys to evaluate control measures in place. And that's it, David, back to you.
So unfortunately, we have run quite tight on time here, and there have been a lot of questions sent over, but we will respond to these when the additional guidance and the link to the webinar is sent out. So we do appreciate your feedback. So if you can take a moment to scan the QR code or follow the link, we would love to hear from you, how we can improve our webinars, or if you found the topic interesting and you want to know more, then by all means, please give us some feedback and we can take it from there. Just want to say thank you. Once again, thank you so much for your time today, and we hope that you managed to take away a few of the key messages. As I said previously, the PowerPoint itself will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, and the links will be distributed along with some additional guidance and example policies and procedures.
And thanks from me. Thanks everybody for joining. Great to see a good turnout today.